People think strength looks like standing tall, like pushing forward, like surviving. I believed that too. For most of my life, I was praised for how well I handled things. How I didn't fall apart when others did. How I adapted, endured, stayed functional no matter what changed or broke around me. I learned early that being strong meant not needing help and not slowing anyone down. So I learned how to survive. I survived disappointments by lowering expectations. I survived loss by compartmentalizing it. I survived uncertainty by staying busy. Every time something threatened to overwhelm me, I tightened my grip and told myself the same thing, just get through this. And I always did. That became my identity, the one who makes it through. The one who doesn't collapse. The one who stays standing while life rearranges itself without asking permission. People admired that. They said I was resilient. Reliable. Someone you could count on. I accepted those labels gratefully. What I didn't notice was how survival slowly replaced living. At first, it felt necessary. There were real challenges, real pressures, real moments when breaking down wasn't an option. I told myself I would rest later. Feel later. Process later. Survival, after all, is temporary. Except later never came. Each crisis flowed into the next. Each adjustment became permanent. I adapted so well that no one noticed how much I was losing in the process. Including me. Survival doesn't announce its cost up front. It charges you quietly, over time. I stopped asking myself how I felt and started asking what needed to be done. That question always had an answer. Feelings were inefficient. Tasks were concrete. So I chose tasks. I became very good at functioning. I woke up, went through routines, met obligations, solved problems. From the outside, my life looked intact. Maybe even successful. There were no obvious signs of damage. No public unraveling. No visible crisis that would justify concern. Inside, something was missing, but absence is hard to diagnose when you've never known anything else. I told myself that numbness was just fatigue. That emotional flatness was the price of adulthood. That wanting more than stability was a luxury for people who hadn't been tested. I had been tested. So I stayed in survival mode long after the danger had passed. The strange thing about survival is that it trains you to distrust ease. Calm feels suspicious. Stillness feels unsafe. When nothing is wrong, you wait for something to go wrong. You stay alert. You stay braced. That vigilance became my baseline. I noticed it in my body before my thoughts caught up. Shoulders always tense. Jaw clenched without reason. Sleep that never fully rested me. Even on good days, I felt like I was preparing for impact. But I told myself that was just how responsible people lived. There was a moment, small, quiet, when I realized something wasn't right. I was sitting alone, with nothing urgent to do, nothing broken to fix, nothing demanding my attention. It should have felt peaceful. Instead, I felt empty. Not sad. Not anxious. Empty in a way that startled me. Like a room after all the furniture has been removed. Functional, but uninhabitable. I sat there waiting for something to rise in me, a thought, a feeling, a desire. Nothing came. That scared me more than pain ever had. Pain, at least, means something is alive. Pain reacts. Pain pushes back. This was different. This was the absence of response. The sense that my inner life had been paused indefinitely while I focused on surviving external demands. I realized then that I had been living on pause for years. Every time something mattered to me, I postponed it until after the next challenge. After the next responsibility. After things calmed down. But things never calmed down, they just changed shape. I survived heartbreak by becoming practical. I survived disappointment by becoming realistic. I survived loss by becoming efficient. Each survival strategy made sense in the moment. Together, they erased me. I couldn't remember the last time I had chosen something because I wanted it. Not because it was necessary, not because it was expected, not because it solved a problem, but because it mattered to me. That question, what do I want, felt embarrassingly difficult. I tried to answer it logically. Comfort. Stability. Peace. Those words sounded right, but they didn't move anything inside me. They felt like conclusions, not desires. Desire requires risk. And survival teaches you to avoid risk at all costs. I began to see how deeply survival had shaped my personality. How careful I was. How restrained. How rarely I allowed myself to hope for anything that wasn't guaranteed. Hope felt irresponsible when you've spent years managing disappointment. So I stopped hoping. People didn't notice the shift because nothing collapsed. I kept showing up. I kept functioning. I kept surviving. That's the danger of endurance, it hides its own damage. I started to suspect that if my life continued exactly like this, I would reach the end having survived everything and lived almost nothing. That thought landed slowly, like a weight settling rather than dropping. I wasn't in danger. I wasn't failing. I was disappearing inside a life that looked perfectly intact. And for the first time, I wondered whether survival was still saving me or whether it had become the thing I needed to survive from. Survival only breaks when it's no longer needed. That was the part I hadn't anticipated. I assumed something dramatic would force the ship to collapse, a loss, a moment so painful it would justify stopping. Instead, life simply stabilized. The emergencies ended. The constant pressure eased. There was no longer a clear reason to stay braced. And yet I couldn't relax. Without crisis to organize myself around, I felt disoriented. Exposed, like a soldier who returns from a war and doesn't know where to put their hands when there's no weapon to hold. I had spent so long reacting to necessity that choice felt foreign. I didn't know how to move unless something pushed me. At first, I filled the space with productivity. That's what survivors do when they don't know how to rest. I stayed busy. I created tasks where none were required. I kept my days full so I wouldn't have to confront the question that had started to form quietly in the background. If I'm not surviving anymore, what am I supposed to be doing? That question terrified me. Because survival gives you purpose by default. You don't have to decide what matters, the situation decides for you. When that disappears, you're left alone with your agency, and agency is heavy when you haven't used it in a long time. I began noticing how uncomfortable I was with unstructured time. Evenings stretched awkwardly. Weekends felt restless instead of freeing. Silence didn't calm me, it made me anxious. My mind kept scanning for problems to solve, threats to anticipate. When none appeared, I felt useless. That realization hit harder than I expected. I had built my worth around endurance. Around being the one who could handle things. Without things to handle, I didn't know how to justify my existence. I had no language for enjoyment that wasn't earned through struggle. Joy felt suspicious. Ease felt undeserved. I started to feel a low-grade panic that had no clear source. Not anxiety about specific events, anxiety about directionlessness. About the possibility that without crisis, my life had no momentum. I wasn't burned out. I was untrained for living. The mental breakdown didn't come as chaos. It came as paralysis. I found myself unable to make decisions that weren't urgent. Small choices felt overwhelming. What to do next? What to want? Where to go? Survival had narrowed my world so efficiently that now, with options open, I didn't know how to step into them. I realized how much I had postponed myself. Every time I told myself after this, once things settle, when it's safe, I had assumed there would be a version of me waiting on the other side, rested, whole, ready to live. That version didn't exist. All that was left was me, exhausted from holding on, with no practice in letting go. I tried to remember who I was before survival took over. What I liked. What I wanted. The memories felt distant, almost fictional. Like stories I had heard about someone else. Survival had overwritten those parts so thoroughly that they no longer felt accessible. That scared me deeply. What if surviving had cost me the ability to live? I noticed how emotionally blunt I had become. Not cruel, just muted. I reacted appropriately to events, but nothing stayed with me. Conversations passed without resonance. Even positive moments felt thin, like they were happening behind glass. I wasn't depressed in the way people expect. I wasn't hopeless or despairing, I was simply absent from my own experience. That absence hurt more than pain ever had. Pain at least demands attention. Absence just spreads. I began to understand why people cling to struggle even when it's destroying them. Struggle gives you shape. It tells you where the edges are. Without it, you have to define yourself, and I had avoided that responsibility for years. Survival had been my excuse. An honorable one. A respected one. No one questions survival. No one tells you to stop being strong. In fact, they encourage it. They reward it. They build narratives around it. But strength without direction is just endurance. And endurance without purpose becomes a prison. The ethical conflict sharpened then. Part of me believed that wanting more than survival was selfish. That I should be grateful. That many people never get the chance to feel empty because they're still fighting. That voice was persuasive. But another voice, quieter, harder to ignore, asked a different question: if you survived only to disappear inside your own life, what was the point of surviving at all? That question dismantled something inside me. I realized that I had been loyal to survival long after it had stopped serving me. That I had mistaken coping mechanisms for character traits. That the habits that once kept me alive were now keeping me numb. I didn't need to be strong anymore. I needed to be present. But presence felt dangerous. Presence meant feeling things I had postponed for years. Grief I had compartmentalized. Anger I had suppressed. Desire I had starved. Presence meant vulnerability without the justification of crisis. I didn't know if I could handle that. There were moments when I wished for something to go wrong again, not because I wanted pain, but because pain would give me direction. It would let me return to what I knew best. That wish horrified me. It showed me how deeply survival had rewired me. The turning point came not with action, but with a refusal. One quiet evening, I caught myself defaulting into another task, another distraction, another way to avoid stillness, and I stopped. I sat there, uncomfortable, restless, exposed. And I didn't move. I let the emptiness exist without immediately trying to fix it. I let the fear rise without turning it into productivity. I stayed with the sensation long enough for something underneath it to surface. What surfaced wasn't clarity. It was grief. Grief for the years I had lived in emergency mode long after the emergency had ended. Grief for the parts of myself I had postponed until they went silent. Grief for the fact that surviving had felt safer than living because living required choice. I cried then, not dramatically, not all at once. Slowly. As if something that had been held in suspension for years was finally allowed to drop. That grief didn't solve anything. But it changed the question. I was no longer asking how to survive the next thing, I was asking something far more unsettling: if I stop holding on, if I stop bracing, who am I when nothing is breaking? Letting go of survival didn't feel like freedom. It felt like standing without armor for the first time and realizing how heavy the armor had been. After that night, when the grief finally surfaced, I expected something to follow: insight, motivation, a plan. That's how recovery stories usually work. You break, you understand, you rebuild. Nothing like that happened. The next morning came quietly. No revelation. No new energy. Just the same room, the same body, the same life, only without the familiar tension that had kept me upright for so long. I felt exposed, almost unfinished. Survival had been my structure. Without it, I didn't know how to hold myself together. For a while, I tried to replace it with intention. I told myself I would live consciously now. That I would choose deliberately, feel deeply, reclaim everything I had postponed. Those thoughts sounded hopeful and completely overwhelming. I realized how unrealistic they were. You don't exit survival and immediately know how to live. You exit survival like someone stepping out of a bunker slowly, blinking, unsure whether the world is still dangerous. So I stopped trying to fix my life. That was the first real change. Instead of asking what should I do now, I asked something smaller, almost embarrassingly basic: what can I tolerate feeling today without running from it? Sometimes the answer was boredom. Sometimes sadness. Sometimes nothing at all. I let that be enough. This wasn't courage. It was necessity. Every time I tried to rush into meaning or purpose, my body recoiled. It had spent too long braced for impact. It needed evidence that stillness wouldn't kill me. So I practiced stillness. Not the peaceful kind, the awkward kind. Sitting without distraction. Walking without urgency. Letting time pass without assigning it a function. At first, it felt like failure. Like wasting the life I had fought so hard to protect. But slowly, something shifted. I began to notice sensations again. Not emotion sensations. The weight of sunlight through a window. The sound of my own breathing. The way my body responded to being treated gently instead of pushed forward. These were small things. They were also real. Survival had taught me to override my body in the name of necessity. Living required listening to it again. That process was clumsy and humbling. I misread signals. I mistook fear for danger and restlessness for desire. I learned, slowly, without drama. There were days when I panicked. Days when the absence of crisis made me feel unmoored, like I was drifting without coordinates. On those days, the old instinct returned: find something to fix. Something to endure. Something to prove you're still strong. I recognized that voice now. It wasn't strength. It was habit. I didn't silence it. I thanked it quietly for keeping me alive when I needed it to, and then I didn't let it run the day. That was the hardest boundary I've ever set. As time passed, I noticed something unexpected. My capacity for feeling didn't return all at once, it came in fragments. Brief moments of interest. Fleeting curiosity. A mild pull towards something that didn't solve a problem. I followed those gently. Not because they promised happiness, but because they asked nothing of survival. They didn't demand endurance or toughness. They didn't require justification. They just existed. I began to understand that living isn't a replacement for surviving. It's a different mode entirely. Survival narrows your world to what's necessary. Living expands it slowly, often uncomfortably, without guarantees. That expansion scared me. But it also reminded me that I was still here. I stopped measuring my days by how much I endured. I started noticing whether I had been present for even a few minutes. Some days, that presence was brief. Other days, it surprised me by staying longer. I didn't become happier in a dramatic way. I became heavier. More anchored. Less hollow. The final realization came much later, quietly, without ceremony. I was reflecting on my past, on all the moments I had told myself just get through this, and I saw them clearly for the first time. They had saved me. And then they had overstayed their welcome. Survival had never been the enemy. It had been a season. A necessary one. The tragedy was not that I survived, it was that I didn't know when to stop. No one tells you how to transition out of endurance. There's no signal that says you're allowed to live now. You have to notice it yourself, and noticing feels dangerous when you've been rewarded for holding on. If you're listening to this because you recognize yourself, because you've survived things by becoming smaller, quieter, tougher, more contained, hear this carefully: survival is not a personality. It is not a destiny. It is not the highest form of strength. It is a tool. And tools are meant to be set down when the job is done. I survived everything except my own life. For a long time, I thought that made me strong. Now I know it made me incomplete. Letting go of survival didn't erase what I went through. It gave it context. I don't romanticize living now. It's messy, uncertain, sometimes frightening. But it's responsive. When something hurts, it hurts honestly. When something matters, I feel it. That's enough. I no longer measure myself by how much I can endure. I measure myself by whether I am here inside my body, inside my choices, inside the moment as it unfolds. Some days, I still brace without realizing it. Old habits die slowly. But now, when I catch myself holding on too tightly, I ask a different question than I used to. Not can I survive this, but am I allowed to live through it? The answer, most days, is yes. And that's the life I'm finally learning how to inhabit.